discussed the feasibility of democracy with different approaches, case studies, and interpretations. Now we will have our next panel discussing if the things that we have been discussing since 3 days on the third day indicate the changes or connect to the changing in global order, and if how the idea of the people plays in part in these global changes. So we are privileged to have wonderful 3 presentations, co-chairs, and a discussant, and looking forward to hearing you all. Thank you.
Okay, I will just say something briefly, quick as the chair, and then we'll get to our exciting speakers. So I'm Ashley Wright. I'm a postdoc at the Blavatnik School of Government. We do have 4 exciting papers today. So we're going to think first about populism as the rule of political passions overriding political interests. And then we'll consider how spatial contestation, using some examples from Turkey, might help us reimagine civil society and democratic resilience. Next, we'll turn to exploring transatlantic links and networks between authoritarian populists, focused especially on the US and Hungary. And finally, we'll trace the rise and transnational impact of the new right in France and think about some of the wider implications for Europe and the world. So we're going to have a few minutes for each presenter. We'll go in the order listed on the program. And since there's a lot of us up here to kind of save on the up and down, we'll just have each presenter come up. And then at the end, I will turn over to Karen, who's going to do some discussion for us. And then we'll open up the floor for questions. All right, kick it away.
Okay. And otherwise, I don't get paid for the
no vanity implied.
That's lovely. I mean, Bedin is a lovely man. He gives me all this money for trips, but he wants the proof that I actually used it. And thank you for sticking to the end. In the previous century, I was at a conference, philosophy conference. Last speaker was German philosopher Karl Otto Appel. And he was making then what was kind of a popular Habermasian anti-postmodernist argument. And he had this high-pitched voice, and he was saying, either we agree that we can agree, or we can go home. And then people were in the back had suitcases, and taxis were coming, and they were all going home. But thank you for this. This is a contrarian paper. I want to argue against what is probably the most dominant view in scholarship about populism. That populism is about the revolt of the people, or the masses, or the lower class against the elites. I think this view is both too broad and too narrow. It's too broad because there are quite a lot of political movements that are definitely not populist, that are about resentment against elites, religious reformers, socialists, anti-colonialists. And if you go to any HR, human resources department in any major corporation, and you apply with a degree in liberal arts from a nice liberal arts or an Ivy League university, you will meet a lot of anti-intellectualism. So too broad, but it's also too narrow, because the leaders of most of the populist movements are either very wealthy people or celebrities, or people who are talented in some way or another, like in music, in sports, or in television. And they are the former traditional politicians who used to be conservative or centrists or none of the above. And at a certain point, they became populists. Just contrast that with the leaders of the great totalitarian movements of the 20th century. Mussolini, Hitler, Lenin, Stalin, these were people who were not elitist. They came from nowhere. So it's simply incorrect to characterize populism as some kind of revolt of the people against the elites. It should be much more specific than that. I want to propose a much more classical theory of populism that is inspired by the Greeks and corresponds with what the Romans considered to be populist, populares. It's the rule of political passions. Political movements are then united by shared passions and their right interests. So the classical example to explain the difference between passion interests, and reason is you come home and you see and you meet your spouse in bed with somebody else. Your passion will be to go to the kitchen and take that knife. And then you will be destroying everybody's life because your kids will not have a father, they will not have a mother, you will be in prison. That's not going to help anybody. Your interest is to calmly take your mobile phone out and take nice photos. And while this gentleman and lady are getting dressed, close the bank account, sell the house, and have it all a fait accompli by the time it's all over. And the reason will be, how do we work this out now? What is the right way to solve that with our kids and so on? So passions are always self-destructive. That's the main difference between passions and interests. Another way of looking at that is that when people's interests are satisfied, one set of interests is satisfied, they usually reapportion their resources to satisfy other interests because it's rational. So if I want to be healthy and wealthy, so if I'm wealthy, I'll start working on my health. If I'm healthy, I'll take more jobs, I'll get wealthier. Wealthier. On the other hand, when interests are satisfied, we spend less of our resources on satisfying our passions because our passions are reduced. We're happy, we're satisfied, our interests are okay. We don't go and become self-destructive. And you can just compare the politics of the 90s, which were all about satisfying interests, with the politics since 2015, which are about satisfying passions. The opposite regime to populism, then, is not democracy. It's not populism against democracy. It's populism against technocracy, which is the rule of reason. Every country has an element of populism. It's not that it's not a black and white. There's a continuum there. This is, of course, the Millennium Dome in London, which is a populist project. It's just a waste of money. But that was containable. Every regime does something that is passionate and irrational, and that's okay as long as this is not the dominant mode of government. Another way of looking at it is using the classification of Harry Frankfurter, a philosopher from Princeton, who said there are wills and there are wills about wills. So I may have a will to smoke, but I may have a will about that will not to smoke. I may not be able, that will about will may not be strong enough. So I may smoke, but if you ask me, do you really want to smoke? I say, no, I don't. I want to quit. I just don't have enough willpower to do that. This is will about will to control the passions. That's what populists don't have. They don't have a will about will. They just move from one passion to another. And that's why they cannot have a rational hierarchy as we would have with interest. This is my first order interest, second order interest. This is the least important thing for me. With passion, you just move from one passion to another. So the strategy of the populist leader is not to tell people, okay, now we will not deal with this passion, we will do the other passion. No, he just diverts attention. Because you can't tell people, stop having the passion. There's no will about will. There's no will to control the passion. The way that the manipulation works is by moving people's attention. Just divert attention, start, it's called the method of putting a dead cat on the table. That is, doesn't matter what we are discussing. If I suddenly take a dead cat out of the bag and I put it on the table, we will be discussing the dead cat. And that's what populist leaders tend to do. So when they don't satisfy some passion, they simply change the discussion. Truth, then, it is what I call an emotivist concept of truth. This truth corresponds with a passion. It doesn't correspond with reality. This is not Wittgenstein. This is not correspondence with the world. This is correspondence with a passion. And the more corresponding it is with a passion, the more authentic it is. That's why the more extreme it is, the more truthful, the more authentic it seems. So if I want to stop immigration, it's authentic. But if I want to put them in a swamp and have crocodiles eat them, that's even more true, because it is more authentic, because the passions here are stronger. And the strongest passions are winning. That's what populism is all about. Populism is a way of presenting the passions in a narrative form. So instead of saying, I really hate Hillary Clinton, I would put it in a story. What is the worst story that you can tell? She's a pedophile. She's running a ring from a pizza parlor. Why pizza? Anybody? Very hot. It's an oven. It's burning. So it's the association of hell, of burning. But in the popular mind, a pizza is associated with hell. So it's a pedophile ring from hell. And that's how you put it in a narrative form. Now, this is not a new story. It used to be called myth. Have you ever wondered why so many Roman emperors married a prostitute and had sex with their children? It was simply the worst thing you can possibly say about a Roman man. That was the worst insult, put in narrative form. It doesn't mean that all these Roman emperors actually did any of that, because usually there's one source that is very problematic. Who knows what these Romans were doing? What you can say for sure is that the worst insult to a Roman man is that he married a prostitute and he committed incest with the children. That's the same story that we have today, only it is, of course, used. We have, I think I jumped. Sorry. Oops. No. I need some help. Sorry. It's man against the machine. At any rate, the important argument here is, yeah, I will use this so that it's a very old story indeed. And the important thing here is that populism, as the rule of passion, is not about the people against the elites. The elites are quite as capable of being self-destructive, just like the common people. And if you look at Greek history, in Athens, Cleon, Cleophon, these were the trumps of the classical era. If we put Cleon and Cleophon today in America, taught them good English, they would feel totally at home. If you send Trump and Orban to ancient Athens, they will feel at home. If you send Hitler to ancient Athens, nobody would know what to do with him. That's a modern invention, totalitarianism. So what we have now is really a return to the classical problems of democracy. I mean, democracy was discredited until the American Revolution. And it was discredited for very good reason. It was self-destructive. Athens destroyed itself. It didn't have to go on with the Peloponnesian War, which was over nothing. It was ruled by passions. There was no need to try the son of Pericles and execute him. This was all passion, uncontrolled passions. The founders of the United States, that was all in their mind, was the destruction of the Roman Republic and the destruction of Athens. And their project was, can we have some kind of a republic, some kind of a democracy that would not follow in those footsteps? And we are exactly back at that moment. It's true the passions of the elites are simply different than the passions of ordinary people. If you look at Alcibiades, Socrates' student, sexiest man alive in Athens, subject to a lot of nice satire in the symposium about Alcibiades trying to get Socrates to bed with him, because Socrates is supposed to be the greatest, the smartest man, so the love should be of wisdom. And then you know, just in American terms, you know, a Kardashian is chasing the full professor in, you know, somewhere. It's a satire, of course. But Alcibiades was totally self-destructive, hot-blooded. Now, the passions of the elites are usually to block mobility, to stop intermingling between the social classes. This is what destroyed Rome, the popularis versus the optimalis. And Julius Caesar, who was the top, the elite of the elite, he was not just an optimalis originally, but a patrician. There were almost no patricians left by that time. Everybody was a pleb. He became the populist leader who indeed completely destroyed then eventually the Roman Republic. Rome for 100 years went into cycles, continuous cycles of self-destruction. Now, the contemporary theories of populism, the ones that I go against in presenting some kind of a classical theory of populism, main problem is attempts to rationalize. We have, ask rational people to explain, they will rationalize. And that's what we do in academia. We try to, the most popular theory in political science is rational choice theory, and mathematically expressed by game theory. How do you use that to explain irrationality, the rule of passions? You can't. So what people do is they rationalize. People in academia think, what would be the solution to the problem of the world? Well, if I ran the world, there's even intellectuals rule the world, if rational bureaucrats rule the world, if you will have socialism. Oh, so what the populists are just slightly confused socialists. What they would really like is egalitarianism and me to run the system, basically. Ignoring the fact that one thing these people are not is egalitarian. They want to be like Trump. They want to be like Orban. They want to be like Berlusconi. They don't want equality. Equality for them is when the elites, just to spite them, not just block their mobility, but they take somebody from the very bottom of society, throws them out to show them it's not just that you don't get ahead yourself, which is, of course, a populist thing because it's self-destructive, but we'll insult you because we'll take somebody under you in society and put them above you. That's the self-destructive. And then the projection of guilt on ethnic minorities, that it's the Asians, it's the Jews, it's not the American elite, it's not the post-communist elite in Slovakia, which, I mean, in Slovakia, again, it's a story, it's not the populace against the elite, it's a faction of the elite against another faction of the elite manipulating people. So, and of course, there's no introspection. I mean, there's no thought. I mean, everybody realizes that there's a lot of dissatisfaction, but nobody who actually blocks mobility stops to think, how do I construct this? That's why I call this we the populists, because we are doing this. We are blocking mobility. And we just need to think why are we doing it, how we are doing it, why is this so self-destructive and irrational, and how can we try and stop doing this? And here I'll stop.
Thank you for that. Thank you for the help. I'm very bad with the technology, so I was kind of wondering how that would go. Anyhow, hello everyone. Good morning, and thank you for having me here. And thank you, Sumaya, for organizing this. And I'm delighted to present here today one of our works in progress with a co-author of mine, Özlem Aslan, who's unfortunately not here today. And the title of our paper is Reclamations of We the People, Rethinking Civil Society Through Spatial Contestations in Turkey. So everything about our paper is very tentative, including the title. So any feedback or suggestion that you might want to give would be immensely appreciated and helpful. And as the very tentative title suggests, in this paper, what we try to do is we try to rethink civil society, and we want to rethink civil society beyond its connotations with the dichotomy of the public and the private, and beyond the institutional structures. Instead, we try to explore civil society as a relational, embodied, and spatial practice that is grounded in pluralism and an ethic of care. And we do this by focusing on the Turkish case, which is a curious study to rethink civil society for many people, but that's what we're trying to do. We're focusing on a context that is characterized by competitive authoritarianism for some, or authoritarian populism for others, and there are many other terms that different scholars would like to name it, but I won't get into that. So the central argument that we want to make is twofold. First, we examine everyday resistances in Turkey that try to make visible what the government attempts to bury invisible. And we argue that this is done by reappropriating public spaces such as parks, university campuses, courtrooms, streets, and other possible public areas that you might think. And in these reappropriations, we suggest that these spaces have become much more politically contested public domains. And that's why we call these spatial contestations. So the second part of the argument is that we argue that these spatial contestations are not just reactive to the authoritarian rule, or the policies that are being made, or what's going on in the country, but they're also generative and transformative in themselves, and they open up a space for reimagining civil society, or what is left of it in Turkey, not as a neutral arena for rational deliberation, which doesn't really work, but as a dynamic, plural, and a caring form of democratic life for its participants, and an arena for political action. We try to ground these examples in three recent examples or case studies of what we call as spatial contestations, and we cover three different forms of contested spaces. So the first one is the streets. So and especially the reclaiming of the Taksim Square during Women's Day, Workers' Day, and LGBTQI+ marches. And I must say that reclaiming the Taksim Square obviously has attained a different and even more important power after the Gezi protest in 2013. So this part of the paper is very much in dialogue with Özge's paper that she presented in the last panel of yesterday. So the second contested space that we discuss is the courtroom. And we examine the transformation of the courtrooms as a site of protest. And in the paper, we cover the aftermath of Turkey's withdrawal from the Istanbul Convention to illustrate this. And the third one that we address is university campus, in which we focus on the ongoing protests in Boğaziçi University that has started in 2021. So here in each example, we say that, like all of these contested spaces illuminates how political agency emerges through collective reappropriation of the space and through practices of relational care and mutual support, which we argue have an iterative potential to redefine we the people from the below and from the margins. So to understand the significance of these spatial contestations, obviously we need to first contextualize them within the political trajectory of Turkey under the Justice and Development Party. Since coming to power in 2002, Erdogan and Justice and Development Party has advanced a model of governance that combines neoliberal economic reforms with majoritarian, and then as years progressed, increasingly conservative and an authoritarian form of populism. At the beginning, the party positioned itself as the true representative of the people and representing the true people of Turkey, as opposed to the main opposition party at the time, and still continues, which is portrayed and traditionally thought as a party of bureaucratic elites. However, over time, the category of the people was narrowed and defined increasingly through the conservative pro-religious nationalism and neoliberal morality and electoral majority. So in Lefort's terms, the plurality of the society, which requires a space of contestation, heterogeneity, and disagreement, was replaced by, again, what Lefort calls as the myth of the one. So Erdogan, in this framing, emerged as the sole legitimate embodiment of the popular will. So this identification with the leader and the people defies what Anchor Smith calls as creative distance that is necessary for democratic representation. So in this environment, critique easily becomes betrayer, dissent becomes treason, and spaces for political plurality like the parliament, the universities, the media, the civil society organizations are systematically emptied out. Yet as this erasure of formal political space, formal political institutions intensifies, what we observe and what we argue in the paper is that we don't have a disappearance of politics, as some would argue, but we observe its reappropriation. Politics moves into streets, parks, squares, and campuses. And then the question becomes, in such an environment, what kind of civil society emerges in these spaces of contestation? So to reflect on this, we build on the work of Paul Routledge and Jacques Rancière to understand these spatial appropriations. So for Routledge, all collective action is spatial, and space is not merely a facilitator, but it's co-produced through action. And Rancière sees politics as a disruption of sensible order by those who have no part in it. So in this view, space becomes a terrain of visibility, of subjectivity, and of emergence. So in Turkey, we see this vividly. When people gather, and most likely under threat, in defiance, and often at great personal risk, what they do is more than protesting a policy or a decree. They reclaim their right to appear as the people. They want to be seen. They want to act together. And they want to reclaim their voice as the people, although they know perfectly that they won't be able to change anything. So this is particularly important in the Turkish context, where the government's political strategy is increasingly seeking to fix the identity as Turkish, Sunni, heterosexual, nationalist, or any other kind of label that would fit the populist agenda at the relevant time. So spatial contestations aim to rupture this imaginary, and they make visible what is plural through making visible feminists, Kurds, students, LGBTQI plus individuals. So with this framework in mind, in the paper, we try to analyze the three empirical cases. So like I won't give much detail now, but like just quickly, briefly run over it. So the first one, as I said, is taking back of the Taksim Square, and Taksim obviously has long served as a symbolic site of contestation. And as I said, since the Gezi protests, it has become even more charged as a site. So on March 8th, May 1st, June 29th, so International Women's Day, Workers' Day, the Pride, groups try to march on Taksim despite the police barricades, bans, and mass arrests. What's crucial here is not the slogans, but the way that these marches are organized and experienced. So for instance, during the Women's Day protest, feminist and LGBTQI plus groups use social media to coordinate their routes and warn each other about the police presence. They walk in groups with strangers just to ensure everybody's safe. They wait together in custody, and they check on each other after the protests. So these are not just protests or expressions of solidarity, in our opinion. They're enactments of a chosen democratic community grounded in interdependence and relational care. So it's not really like building a community, but choosing your own community. That is important. So it's more relational than communitarian. So the second example is the courtrooms as contested spaces. So in 2021, Turkey withdrew from Istanbul Convention, an international treaty aimed at combating violence against women. And in response, women's rights organizations, lawyers, and activists filed over 200 lawsuits demanding its reinstatement. And on April 28, 2022, the Council of the State held its first hearing. And hundreds of women traveled to Ankara from across the country, from Mersin, from Adana, from Eskişehir, to be present at that hearing. And many were initially barred from entering the courtroom. They responded by chanting slogans and pushing against the barricades and refusing to leave under the doors were opened. So this is not a protest about, withdrawal from an international convention only. The courtroom becomes a space of embodied dissent, where women collectively affirm their presence and their political agency and their right to shape the rules that govern their own lives. And again, here care was very much central. And care does not appear as a sentiment here, and I want to really clarify that, but as a form of democratic action and being citizens. It's a part of being a citizen. So the third example is called Turning Your Back, the protest at Boğaziçi University. So since 2021, academic faculty at Boğaziçi University hold daily silent vigils in protest of the government's appointment of a rector instead of the democratically elected one. So since 2021, at 12:15 p.m. each day, faculty members gather in their academic gowns and turn their backs to the rector's office, and students and alumni join them. So these acts, though quiet, are deeply political. They reclaim the university and the university square, not just as a site of academic freedom, but a space of moral authority. They assert through repeated embodied presence that the university belongs to its community and not the state. Here too, we see care. Faculty support students facing persecution, for instance. Alumni mobilize their resources. Court cases are filed collectively, and the protest is sustained through relationships, through mutual risk, and through shared responsibility. Across all of these cases, what emerges is a slightly different conception of civil society, we think. Not as an abstract space of deliberation, not as a buffer between the state and the market, but as a lived, contested, and relational terrain shaped by shared vulnerability and collective action. We draw here on feminist theorists such as Carol Pateman and Phillips, Iris Marion Young, and also we bring in Ella Myers, whose work is very central to our argument. Most of these, feminist critiques of civil society have long critiqued the masculinist modes of civil society that excludes dependency, emotion, and embodiment. So the way we bring in Ella Myers is that, is with regard to her concept of worldly ethics, a form of democratic care expressed not by isolated individuals, but by associations of selves gathered around a shared concern. In Turkey's spatial contestations, we see this, there's coaction and there are concrete sites, the streets, the courtroom, the university, that transform these places into ethical and political commons. In this way, It is in this way that spatial contestations generate an alternative political ethical space of their own, which is also a space of care, as Myers argues. Ella Myers' conception of worldly ethics is inspired from Hannah Arendt's Amor Mundi, that describes an ethical orientation grounded in engagement with the world as it is, rather than an abstract principle or an idealized norm. So like Myers, the type of care we're talking about is not individualistic care, is not a sentiment. Yet in our analysis, it shows that intersubjective care, the care people show to one another, and associational care work together in the face of authoritarian pressure, where participants both care for each other and care for the collective goods of democracy and freedom. Worldly ethics and associational care in this regard do not necessarily negate the importance of intersubjective care between the participants of these protests. It is through showing up physically, visibly, and vulnerably that people reclaim themselves as the people and constitute themselves as political actors. And as a result, we argue civil society is renewed as a practice of interdependence. So to conclude, in the face of authoritarianism's symbolic hegemonic drive toward unity, singularity, and control, spatial contestations in Turkey reassert plurality, dissent, and embodied difference. These are not only acts of resistance, they are also practices of democratic world building. They reimagine civil society not as a neutral site, but as a space constituted through agonism, vulnerability, and care. Civil society then is not something that exists between the state and the individual. It is something we do in squares, in courtrooms, and in campuses, together through risk, through presence, and through acts of care, which requires responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. This is a great pleasure and honor being here. I'm Attila Antol. I'm a senior lecturer in political science at Faculty of Law at the International University based in Budapest. And I will speak about a subtopic of my broad research project. This project is about the historical and theoretical investigation of authoritarian populism in Eastern Europe, with a specific emphasis on its legal implication, how the authoritarian legal system producing law, authoritarian legality in my definition, how the constitutional dictatorship is being made especially in Hungary. But today I would like to offer you an important and probably interesting subtopic of this project, the transatlantic network of authoritarian populism, because it is a experienced reality in Hungary, and of course both sides of the Atlantic, that there is such a thing which can be described as a internationalization of transatlantic authoritarian populism. First of all, I would like to put an emphasis on the theoretical background of the internationalization tendencies from the perspective of Hungary and, of course, its US implication. After that, I put an emphasis on the framework, the broad framework of the case study, because as I mentioned before, The main thing here is the internationalization tendencies concerning Hungary and US is embedded into a theoretical, ideological, and practical implication. In the middle of this is the application and the approach of the highly centralized neo-Schmittian approach of the executive power. And after that, I would like to make some conclusions. So some theoretical introduction in this sense. Right-wing authoritarian populism is a very important topic investigating the historical background, the theoretical background of populism, and it represents a very important deep tradition of autocracy, or we can speak about from Eastern European perspective, embedded neoliberal autocratic tendencies. But in the last decades, we have seen that there are such similarities between Western and Eastern European authoritarian framework, and the previous research on internationalization tendencies in conjunction with populism, which previously focused on left-wing populism. So this massive agenda can apply to the internationalization of right-wing approach. And unfortunately, the rise of Orbanism and Trumpism and several other instances and examples proved that right-wing authoritarian populism is based on this international cooperation between national organized or nationalist political parties and movements. So we can speak about at the same time, and it is not a controversy, nationalist parties and movements which are highly internationalized. So we have to admit that there are several historical, theoretical, and ideological implications behind this, and we have to investigate this very important situation, because, for instance, in the 20th century, the internationalization of communist movement can be described in a very transparent ideological background, but nowadays, in this mentioned neo-Schmittian framework, we have to create the historical and theoretical investigation in the light of the internationalization right-wing tendencies. Just two things here. On the one hand, the mentioned neo-Schmittian roots of this internationalization tendency, and the other hand, from the US perspective, it is based on the approach of the strong executive power, unitary executive theory. So from the neo-Schmittian framework, which we can describe as a prevailing of the political, it is not a surprise that authoritarian populist right-wing forces are deeply embedded into this neo-Schmittian framework. So we can speak about some kind of neo-Schmittian approach, neo-Schmittian heritage behind Orbanism and Trumpism. And the reinvestigation of Carl Schmitt and his political and constitutional thoughts had a huge impact, not just the advisors and political and theoretical pundits of Orban, but it has a huge implication in conjunction with the American conservative hemisphere. So there is a very important, very strong vision in conjunction with the executive power, a vision that describes the executive power without any constitutional or political constraint, or moreover, embedded into this very Schmittian approach, constitutional limits and constitutional constraint, especially under state of emergency or unexpected dangers. So these constitutional limits can be seen as some kind of social threats which constrain the act of the executive power. So this is the embedded neo-Schmittian approach behind this. And for instance, Viktor Orban's speeches and, for instance, Trump vision in terms of this presidency can prove this situation. The executive power can do whatever it wants. And of course, from the other side of the Atlantic, there are other very important similarities and instances. The unitary executive theory belongs to this from the Morrison versus Olson case. It is a very important phenomena, according to Justice Antonin Scalia, that the interpretation of Article 2 belongs to these unitary executive tendencies, and it means that the political leader, the strong political leader, has the political and constitutional capacity, and all the executive power belongs to this strong leader. From theoretical perspective, constitutionally and politically speaking, unitary executive theory itself didn't have impact, for instance, in the Hungarian case, but unfortunately it has been translated to the Hungarian constitutional political theoretical language. The national constitutional identity, at least to my intention, can be seen as some kind of ideological and political translation to this. Every debates between the European Union, European bureaucracy, and the Hungarian government can be framed by the Orbán regime in the light of national constitutional identity, and there are lots of similarities between national constitutional identity theory and, of course, the UET, the unitary executive theory. So this is an unlimited approach of executive power, and the subordination of judicial and other constitutional structure is not acceptable by these neo-Schmittian approaches. According to this theoretical and political background, we can speak about the transnationalization tendencies between the Hungarian and the US hemispheres of authoritarian right-wing populism or the neo-conservative structure. I put an emphasis on three main pillars: the relationship from the perspective of the institutionalization tendencies, both sides of the Atlantic. After that, I put an emphasis on, just very briefly, the lobbying structure of the Orbán regime. It's also a very interesting phenomena, how the authoritarian Orbán regime established a well-structured and very dangerous lobbying structure in Washington. And after that, I would like to speak about, just very briefly, from the intellectual hegemonic perspective, from a Gramscian sense, there is a deep state measure in conjunction with to create this intellectual hegemony. So first thing first, it is a very important tendency and dates back before the creation of the Orbán regime in 2010, that the Hungarian conservative right, before its authoritarian turning point, has been influenced by the consultant duo George Birnbaum and Arthur Finkelstein. And from this very moment, the hate politics and creating this neo-Schmittian approach of doing politics had a huge impact on the Orbán circle. And after that, when the authoritarian tipping point has happened in 2010. This massive structure has been boosted, and unfortunately, Orbán recognized that there is a very important room for maneuver from a Gramscian sense to creating this transatlantic political agenda. And of course, the main target was Trump and the emerging Trumpism, and Viktor Orbán tried to create himself this transatlantic network between Orbanism and Trumpism. For instance, Trump has been described by Orbán as some kind of world political leader who can save the world. And not just from theoretical ideological perspective, but from the point of institutionalization, several instances have happened. For instance, the CPEC structure has been evolved. Orbán appeared in CPEC event in 2022, and after that, between 2022 and this year, Hungary organized and Orbán regime organized a CPEC event in Budapest, creating this massive transatlantic network of authoritarian populism, not just from Hungarian perspective. It is also very interesting in this field that how the Orbán regime is creating the Eastern European authoritarian populist agenda, and the main player here is Poland, of course. The second structure of this massive transatlantic network is about the lobbying structure. At least three main elements here can be mentioned. Of course, there is a massive and well-established lobbying structure under the FARA structure in terms of the Orbán regime. At least 15 professional lobbyists are about to create this lobbying structure. But unfortunately, as I mentioned before, using his previous experiences to create a massive social political structure in Hungary, Orbán has found a way to create from the Hungarian diaspora and other institutions a informal network of lobbying structure. This is not under the FARA. It is embedded into the US Hungarian political circus and embedded to the Washington political structure. For instance, the Hungarian Foundation is a massive player here, and other institutions, for instance, American Hungarian Federation and Hungarian American Coalition, are very important players in this field. So this is a well-established, well-networked structure of lobbying system based on, of course, Hungarian taxpayer money. And some words about the mentioned Gramscian sense from the perspective of intellectual hegemonic structure. Of course, thank you. Of course, it is very important that the institutionalization phenomena appeared here because the mentioned phenomena of the CPEC network is also appearing here. The Hungarian organizer of the CPEC event, this is Center for Fundamental Rights, and other institutions, for instance, Matthias Corvinus Collegium, are very important players in this field to creating this transatlantic network of authoritarian populism. Every institution have a well-established, well-paid visiting fellow structure. Such guys appeared here, for instance, Rod Deher, who is a very important intermediator between the Hungarian government and the US administration. This is not just a personal good relationship between the two administrations, where, for instance, the visiting fellow of these institutions, Rod Deher, has a good personal relationship to the current US Vice President, J.D. Vance, but this based on the hegemonic ideological structure, because from Kantian sense, this institutional and ideological network is based on this authoritarian populist agenda. Some conclusions. As I mentioned before, this is not a very new phenomena, but we can be surprised at how this nation-based or some kind nationalist structure created this international tendency, internationalized network of authoritarian populism. But the ideological and the theoretical background matters in this sense. And Orbanism and Trumpism proved to be a very coherent new ideologies for the current and contemporary authoritarian populism. It is very important, and Viktor Orban pointed out very well, there is a quote, "We have been Trump before Trump," quote ends. It is a very, very impressive characterization of this international agenda of authoritarian right-wing populism. For instance, the main elements of Orbanism, which is based on the end of welfare state, merit-based and work-based economy, are very, very important in the light of Trumpism. And of course, the subordination of the state to this authoritarian right-wing structure is also very important. So this is a very emerging and very, very interesting topic. How can we describe this new situation? And in the last half year, for instance, Anne Applebaum and Ivan Krastev and others pointed it out that the Hungarian ideology of the Orbanism had a huge impact on this transatlantic network of authoritarian populism. There are several exchange of ideologies, but behind this, there is a massive institutional background. Thank you for your attention.
Yeah, I think now maybe we can give floor to our discussant, Karen, just to.
My presentation.
I'm sorry.
You can find if I emailed my presentation. Can you check first? And if not, I will use my computer. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Hi, everyone. First, thank you very much for ECPS to organize these events and having me. It seems that I'm the last presenter here. It won't be easy for me to present this presentation, but I'll try to do my best. We started a project on the French New Right and its impact on the European politics and democracy with a colleague at King's College with Russell Foster. We've just started our project to try to find out the effect of French New Right on the radical right and populist political parties and movements in Europe, because we think that although there is a huge literature on the populist and political right parties and movements in Europe, especially the New Right and Nouvelle Droite, French New Right impact has been underestimated, or we have a really few study on this impact. That's why we just started to this project, and this presentation will be just a simple introduction of the project, and I hope we will share more information and what we found in the future conferences. Yeah. Yes, a brief overview. First, I will try to say a few words about the new right, because we'll see when we talk about new right, we have different new right, and we have the different, the new right that has different meaning in different countries sometimes. And I'll give also a few words on the cultural hegemony and metapolitics. Then I'll try to give some example from Poland, Hungary, and Italy. These three countries are affected by French New Right, and then the political parties applied these politics and strategies. They came to power. And then I'll give a few conclusion. Yeah. As many things has been said about populist and radical and populist political parties in Europe, we see a really huge change in the European politics, especially especially in the last 20 years. But since the beginning of 21st century, this becomes something normal. It has been normalized. However, in 1999, when in Austria, the Freedom Party came to power, it got lots of reaction from Europe, even from Israel, from all over the world. But then slowly, this kind of political parties and their success, in some countries, they become part of power. In some countries, they came to power. It becomes normal, and even their politics becomes part of mainstream political parties' policies. And all these political parties actually originally have been affected by French New Right called Nouvelle Droite, and sometimes we call them Nouvelle Droite Française. In French, the French New Right. Sometimes it's because of its English translation, but this New Right has different meaning, as I said. For example, in general, in United Kingdom or in Turkey or in America, in United States of America, when we talk about New Right, usually we remember in general a kind of neoliberal politics applied by Thatcher, and then in United States by Reagan, and then in Germany by Helmut Kohl, and in Turkey by Turgut Özal, starting from 70s till the end of 90s. And this kind of new right is usually related to economic policies, but the new right which we are going to talk about is actually different than this one. The new right, the French new right we are going to talk about, it has been established since the end of 60s, by a group of intellectual, former Nazi and some socialist and Nazist politician or intellectuals have founded a kind of group called GRIS, Groupement de Recherche et d'Études pour la Civilisation Européenne. That's been a research and study group for European civilization. And this movement tried to change the way that the racist ideas, racist ideology, which has lost its impact, especially after the Second World War, the defeat of Nazi regime. It was difficult to talk about and to support these ideas in the world, but Alain de Benoit and a few friends, his friends tried to change the way, the way and repackage in a way these ideas to have a kind of cultural hegemony to get the power. And the main idea of doing this was to protect the European civilization against the Marxist and leftist and even liberal ideology and power. At the beginning, they tried to be part of right-wing governments. They tried to make relationship with them, but they couldn't succeed it. And then at this time, there was a socialist government in France with François Mitterrand. François Mitterrand has opened the way of radical right party, which called Front National, and had good relationship with these new rights, just to divide the right-wing politics and to maintain power. And the new right has taken advantage of this to develop a new strategy against the immigrants, and then to use it as an instrument, political instrument, to spread their ideas. And they try to find an ideological route for the European civilization, and instead of biologic differences and hierarchy, they try to spread the idea of cultural hierarchy and cultural differences, which can be used as a right to have its own culture. But actually, the main idea was to separate the small migrations culture and try to establish a consensus for the European civilization. And that's called the New Right. But at the same time, we had another New Right group, which was established by Michel Georges Macbeth in 1973. And this new French right was actually quite different than the French right, the Nouvelle Droite, which was established by Alain de Benoit and his friends. The differences between them, the main differences between them, this Nouvelle Droite Française was supporting the violence. It was kind of anarchist and supporting the violence to make a revolution, a right-wing revolution, but it didn't take long, and it has been disbanded in 1985. So we have three different new right, but what we are going to talk about it's the French new right, established by Alain de Benoit and his friends. And then this French New Right, to spread the idea of creating or supporting the European civilization, they accepted kind of cultural hegemony which comes from Marxist Antonio Gramsci, and to come to power for them, it was important to create a cultural hegemony and then to use metapolitics to shape the way of the power. And this strategy and cultural hegemony theory, it has been adopted also by different political parties in Europe, in Austria, for example, by Freedom Party, in Netherlands, and then in Italy, in Hungary, in Poland, and in many different parts of Europe. They used the same strategies, metapolitics and cultural hegemony theory to come to power or to maintain the power. Sorry. Yeah. And yeah, but what is interesting here, this French New Right has accepted European culture, European civilization as differed from the Christianity, and accepted kind of paganism and Roman culture as the roots of European culture. But which is interesting, the political parties which adopted the new rights ideas and strategies, they are usually supported by church and conservative communities. This is quite interesting. As Attila said, for example, in his presentation, this French New Right was mainly against Christianity, against the American culture, Americanism, globalism, and even in some countries against the European Union and the unity of Europe. But very interestingly, in each country, this kind of political parties has a very good relationship with, for example, Donald Trump, American president, or populist establishment or populist groups in United States as well. This is one of the most interesting part or paradox of the Nouvelle Droite française. It has many paradoxes, and in each country, it has been accepted with different way. Just it's like a water. It takes the shape of the country, of the shape of the where it has, what and then it's very useful for every kind of strategy to come to power. And the main idea here is just to come to power and then maintain the power. And then even it's in France, it was against the Catholicism and the church. In Poland, in Hungary, and in Italy, it has a very good relationship with church, and even church was supported this kind of politics. Yeah, and in Poland, for example, when they came to power in Poland, the Kaczynski brothers, they came to power, and they changed lots of law. They made lots of legislation change to maintain the power, and even though it was a European Union member, the European Union, with the democratic and human rights value that's taken from the European Union, they changed the law against the European Union legislations, but and then lastly, in a few weeks ago, Navrojki, who had a close relationship with Trump, he came to power, and he defines himself a representative of a broadly defined patriotic camp. And this is also one of the most paradoxical part of radical rights strategy. It has also supported by Donald Trump. Yeah. And in Hungary, Viktor Orban came to power by using this French new right strategy, metapolitics. He came to power in 2010, and since then he maintained his power. He also changed lots of law, and he even called the regime a new democracy, which he called illiberal democracy, and it's one of the most representable part of these French new rights ideas and strategy. And in Italy as well, we have this kind of new right effect, which started in 70s, and especially former fascist intellectuals had relationship with French new right, Alain de Benoist, French new right leaders, Alain de Benoist and his friends. And then they translated his rights to Italian and even to English as well. Many of works has been translated into English as well. And then they try to use the same way to publish with the journal the new right ideology, and the Italian new right has been established by this way. And also in Italy we have Casa Pound movement, which called Casa Pound, which use exactly the French new right symbols and strategies. All this, with all these changes, Giorgia Meloni came to power in 2022, and then it has also now used the same strategy to maintain the power. So a few words for conclusion. The program and the policy of radical right and populist party influenced by the French new right brought many deep changes to these countries and to the European politics. And we try to understand the policy and the metapolitical infiltration strategy of the French new right, which provide groundwork for a shift away from liberal democracy to illiberal democracy. But the future research could examine how liberal institutions can respond to this counter-hegemonic struggle. And thank you for your patience. If you have any question, I'll try to, we can try to discuss. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much to all our presenters. And Murat, sorry for the confusion. And now I would like to give the floor to Karen to get her feedback, and then I'll open the floor for the Q&A session.
Thank you very much. When I was assigned this role, I didn't know that I would have 4 great papers to read. And I can say that I read them all with a lot of pleasure, and I learned a lot. So I love them all. I have a number of questions and some possible comments that I would like to share with you. And yeah, let's see where that gets us. I will begin by the end, since everybody remembers the last one best. That was absolutely fascinating. I'm quite familiar with the French Nouvelle Droite, and I thought it really interesting to see how you showed how it was taken up elsewhere. And there are a lot of studies on how it has fed into discourse in Germany as well. And I'd be happy to give you a link to one of the organizations who do study that for Germany. Might be interesting. What it seems to me in your paper is that you show these family resemblances, but between the arguments in the different countries and how it all can be deduced back to well, the French Nouvelle Droite. But what I found a little bit missing, or what I would be interested in, would be to see a little bit more clearly what the transmission mechanisms are. So who were the people who took what up, and how did they then spread that in their respective environments? Do people nowadays quote de Benoit and the others? Are they topics, or is it something that has somehow been absorbed in general beliefs in certain groups of politicians or thinkers? Has the societal discussion been moved by that? You know, sometimes you have one thinker that says something and opens this famous Overton window, and in society people will begin to talk about these things, and they didn't before. Is that what happened, or is there a direct line? That would be one of the things I'd be interested in. And that applies both to your paper and to the one we heard before. I sometimes wonder whether it really makes sense to distinguish so much between the different national intellectual traditions. After all, Europe has become an intellectual ground where people draw on each other, etc. So it is still interesting to know the exact sources of something, but I wonder whether these international transmissions aren't part of normality. And yeah, which doesn't mean it isn't interesting to look how these lines run exactly, but still. You're using the word that these people are waging or were waging an intellectual war. That's strong language. It's probably correct and appropriate. And what I found important is that you make the point that what is really dangerous about that is that their aim is to destroy democracy. This language of cultural or intellectual wars is one that is used by many people, and I'm not sure I find it always bad. And it has to do with the end goal that you fixed yourselves, I think. And as you say, when it's about destroying democracy, it is, of course, dangerous. Let me come to the paper before that on the Schmittian heritage and urbanism and Trumpism and how they interact. It was a nightmare to read. And for you probably to write. Very interesting. Many things one doesn't really know, so that is really helpful. Again, I would be interested in knowing whether Trump and/or Orban is explicitly ever referred to Schmitt, or whether that's, as I said earlier, absorbed into the background of their beliefs, and you just ascribe it to what usually can be referred back to Schmitt. Then something that is more methodological, perhaps. You're using network analysis. Network analysis is fascinating. And since I'm not really familiar with the Hungarian context, there's no judgment whatsoever I can have on the correctness of what you're writing. I've just noticed that oftentimes when network analysis is being employed, what people don't take into account is that the agents they look at, they might be changing in their attitudes over time. So there may be people, and I think maybe that's even true for Orban, who had liberal beliefs in the beginning and then was corrupted through whatever, through power, through influences, maybe through reading Schmidt, I don't know. But people move, people evolve, people learn or unlearn certain things. And network analysis doesn't usually take that into account. And sometimes you end up shedding a bad light on someone who learned and who changed and who wouldn't endorse things any longer. And in order to be fair, one has to be very precise. And that's just something I couldn't control for in this context because I don't know it well enough. I just wanted to make that warning. Yes, let's talk about Turkey. Again, fascinating. And the paper is so full of concepts that was very helpful for me to help and structure the whole thing. Lovely, lovely work. I stumbled over the feminist framework simply for the reason that in order to make that point so strongly, you need to come up with an opponent, and that opponent, which is sort of the male-dominated, neoliberal, conservative, etc. I wonder whether that ever existed. It's just, I think it's frankly a bit overdone. I don't know any theory, and I'm an economist, and we have for a long time been working with the Homo economicus, but everybody knew it was only a heuristic device. And of course, people are not just rational or just maximizing some gains or profits or whatsoever. But of course, people care about their environment. I mean, one of the early and most important thinkers of economics are Adam Smith, who studied here in Oxford. And of course, he knew that people have other regarding and self-regarding instincts. And that's been present in economic science, at least ever since. And I'd be surprised to know that that wouldn't be the case in political science. So I agree with what you say. I just think you're making up a bogeyman, which doesn't help. So that is that. And what I would find interesting here again is to see where your theory and the deduction that you make will eventually lead you when it comes to the point of asking what forms of civil protest and reclaiming democratic rights, what does it make them successful at some point? You say it's transformatory, and it may be transformatory for people's conscience, but at what threshold does it become transformatory for society in a political sense? When do you topple Erdogan? That's basically the question I'm asking. And you've seen it in Belarus. It didn't work at all. There was a strong civil society that reclaimed their political actions and rights, and it was just killed off. So what does that do? And so I think the interesting bit would be the threshold. So, and the last paper, which was originally the first, I loved it too, more for conceptual reasons. I think that this new way or the old way of dealing with populism is a very promising and interesting one. And I agree that over-rationalizing irrational behavior is not going to lead us anywhere. But I think I disagree a little bit about the fact that things like, well, rational game theory or things like that won't help at all. That will not have to be the only tool that we use. What we will use, what we need to use, and what we already do use in many instances, empirical evidence, that is experience, looking at how people act. And again, that's what we do in economics. We've used the Homo economicus for a long time, but empirical evidence has showed us that people are more altruistic than we think, that people are more interested in collectives than we think, or than the original premise argued. And that can be incorporated in models, in theories of understanding, which will allow you to react in a more appropriate way. So I'm not sure the rejection of the traditional approach, the rationalistic approach, needs to be as fierce. Then about the passions and reason. David Hume said that reason is always the slave of the passions. Yeah, but then Adam Smith showed up and said that, well, there is a balancing going on. We will eventually have both. Are you saying that populists will manage to teach people in such a way that reason will be gone? Will we only have the passions left? The impartial spectator will be buried? What's going on there? I would like to have a little more beef, a little more detail, again, about the processes that are at work here, perhaps underlying. And then perhaps the last thing, you mentioned the self-destructiveness of populism. Are you basically saying that there's hope? And at what cost would that then come about? Populist rule that uses the passions may lead to authoritarianism, to totalitarianism, to war. The cost may be enormous. So what can we do to prevent that from happening? How can we prevent them from being self-destructive and destroying us with them? That's it.
And this was really fascinating. Thank you so much. Very comprehensive comments and feedback. Thanks a lot. I think our presenters, maybe they would like to respond to questions and comments. We can start with Azize and then go in the presentations order.
Right, can you hear me? Actually, I should make first perhaps a comment, not a comment, but a testimony, as it were, about the international network and Alain de Benoit, because I was there. Alain de Benoit was translated to English and published in the journal Telos in New York about 25 years ago, and I was there. Telos was started in 1968 by an Italian Marxist named Paul Piccone, who was then in Buffalo. Then he was teaching sociology at Washington University in St. Louis. Then when it came to tenure, he had these support letters from Jean-Paul Sartre, Jürgen Habermas, and so on, so he didn't get tenure. Then he moved to New York, and then sort of in the 70s, they were publishing kind of Euro-Marxism, Nouveau Gauche, not Nouveau Droite. And then he settled in Manhattan, where I was living at the time. He bonded with Gary Ullman, who was a student of Schmitt, again, within the context of 60s, 70s leftism. Gary Ullman was the son of German immigrants who converted to Calvinism, so he had a complex identity as well. And for him, Schmitt, he never worked in his life. His father was very wealthy, and Schmitt was his guru. And then they connected them with all kind of Schmittian in Europe who were donating to keep Telos going. Paul Piccone then joined the Lega Norda, and through there, they got to Alain de Benoit. He let me read the translation before he published it, and I told him I thought it was garbage. And then he said, Alain Benoit come here next week. And I said, I'll skip it. And he said, I know he's an anti-Semite, so I'm going to take him to a good Jewish restaurant. Or as Paul, I'm going to take him to a good Jewish restaurant. I know he's a Semite, so I'll give him some matzah ball soup. That's the context. At that time, I'm talking 25 years ago, I thought the whole thing was a joke. I thought it was kind of provocation to bring this. I mean, basically, the paganism it's a Nazi paganism. That's what it's about. That's why it's anti-Christian, because he builds on this Nazi anti-Christian tradition because he's an anti-Semite. That's why. Because if Christianity comes from Judaism, we can't do it. Anyway, that's what I had to say about. So the origin is the new left became the new right. And these were the networks that they developed from Schmidt through Europe and the Lega Nord. Empirical evidence, well, we're not going to resolve that. The debate about behavioral economics, to what extent economics is an empirical science or it's a rational science. What we need to do is work on what works, come up with models that explain. I don't see economic models that explain more on the micro level. When you have experiments in behavior economics, sure, that there are contexts that you can see people behave rationally or less rationally, but these are very isolated conditions. Out there in the real world, it's quite difficult. The question of how the populists suppress reason is much more interesting. So one, the most ancient method is the mass rallies. That's when you're part of a mob. You have no personal identity, and then whatever ridiculous passions you have, they are being reinforced by other people, and you don't have the personal responsibility for this. So it's the mass moving, and that's why indeed all these fellows are working with mass rallies, and that's been working since the Greeks. The new space for mass rally is Twitter. Then you can create the same mobs. You have anonymity. You can exercise your passions and go there. That's why, and the algorithms are promoting this suppression of reason. So the problem is not social media. The problem is not the problem is the algorithms. I mean, you can write different algorithms that will not encourage that. But basically, greed is dictating algorithms that inflame the passions, because then people provoke each other, then they spend the most time in front of the idiotic machine. And that's how it works. Self-destruction. Populism can work, basically there are three ways that they can survive if they maintain a patina of populism and have the opposite policies. So my favorite example is Boris Johnson. So all the media, all the attention was on the plan to send immigrants to Rwanda. Not a single immigrant was sent to Rwanda. What he did is he had a totally rational, brilliant scheme to bring 1 million immigrants who would solve the demographic problem that exists in continental Europe and the UK. Now there's no problem of young people working and paying for the welfare system. If you had another 1 million, it would have been solved even better. So you create, you divert attention from people, like send them the red meat and then do the exact opposite. That can work. Otherwise, populism is unstable because it's self-destructive. So either it can become authoritarian, and then again, an authoritarian regime does not have to satisfy the passion. They can do all sorts of rational things to survive, or, well, a liberal restoration, which is what I would hope would happen, but that's my personal hope, that out of the ashes would emerge a new liberal regime.
Now, would you like to respond? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. I kind of mixed up the order.
Well, I'm sorry, just one more testimony, as it were, that just occurred to me because you mentioned Arthur Finkelstein. I met him in 2010 because he was then working for the Czech right-wing party, normal conservative party, and I had friends there, and they invited him and told me, it's fascinating, man, come meet him. Soft-spoken, cultured, highly civilized, married his boyfriend the moment it was legal, and adopted children together. So I asked him basically, I didn't put it in such terms, but what do you think you're doing? And he was telling me, look, I'm going to work for two types of politicians. Either politicians I generally agree with them, don't have to agree about every detail, but generally I'm in agreement with them. And he was a libertarian. So in that, and he said, yeah, I would never work for Donald Trump. Or I would work for politicians in places I just don't give a damn who wins. And that was Hungary. And short-sighted, because he was this kind of rational, just think about the engineer who would build a rational weapon of mass destruction, just because of the aesthetic pleasure of using his technical skill, and not thinking that it would shoot back at him. And being Jewish, you should have thought about that, please. You don't light a fire in one place and not expect to spread elsewhere. But that was where he came from. That's just my testimony about Finkelstein.
Thank you.
Okay, now
Yes.
Sorry.
So sorry. Okay, so what's the threshold? It's an amazing question. I wish I could answer, but I can't, is the short answer. But the motivation that we had before writing this paper was that why are people still protesting? Because they know it's not going to change anything, and they risk a lot of things, and they give time and energy, and it's a very demanding thing. And why are they continuing to do these things and not try to find an academic job in a different country? So why are people still continuing to do this? Because the interest thing is not there. So that was our we can't see the threshold, and there is a hopelessness, but also there's great hope at the same time. So that was the motivating question to begin with. And yeah, hopefully, what I think it's kind of related to the passions thing, because populism operates with passions. The grassroots response to populism oppositionally also have to involve passions, and it's not really you have to continue, although it's not rationally significant to continue, or else it's not through all of the arguments that these groups made through reason doesn't really lead somewhere, but it's through these grassroots protests, which are very short-term, very sporadic, very temporal, not like how civil society was in early 2000s, for instance, when everything flourished. So there's a death of civil society on one end. On the other hand, there are these alternative kind of things being in a very mass scale continuing. So so it doesn't become important for them to continue. So, and that's something that we're trying to answer. And I don't know, it's very in early stages, and yeah, of course, in economics there are animal spirits, it's the end of the term in the equation, but it exists. That's true. The feminist critiques of civil society is how we're trying to kind of see if we can put care relationality into that. So we want to critique the feminist critiques of civil society, because the puzzle about feminist critiques of civil society is that there's no feminist conception of civil society. So there's only the critiques. And when you read the critique, it can read as a caricature. You're very right. So it's can we build on these experiences to build a feminist or a more plural, or I don't know if it will be feminist at the end, to be honest, but that's where we started. And make these kind of the last term in the equation more central to the model. Would that be possible? It's a question. So I agree with you fully. And yeah, hopefully we will be able to synthesize the two parts together in a more coherent way. We thought it would be more structured at this point, but we lagged a little bit. So some of the questions are like I understand, and it gives me and I'm sure my co-author as well some more direction. So thank you very much.
If I may exploit my situation, Pınar, I would like to add something.
Yeah.
When you talk about care, when it comes to civil society in Turkey, I just wonder if you consider different parts of that civil society, because in Turkey, unfortunately, it's very fractured, and even sometimes it's a bit antagonistic. When we think about ethnic composition or different religious groups and different secular groups. So do you think there is care among to each other, or this care is just within those small groups? So if it is so, then do you think it will take the society to a point when there's a really kind of autocratic regime prevailing in the country? Did you look at that aspect of the situation when formulating your methodology?
Yeah, so it's for us, you know, like for instance, when during the mass protests, when everybody's under the, you know, police violence, and where there is immense, you know, interruption, then during those temporal moments, and it's like very fleeting, it doesn't really matter. You just want to help who's next to you, right? So it's like and of course, you know, that's the pattern in the Turkish civil society forever, like in even the feminist one, where there has been efforts to bring together different segments of the women's rights movement together. And despite all of the efforts, at the end of the day, the associational structures remained within their own bounds, which is a problem about feminist solidarity in Turkey from where I stand. So it's very hard, like you know, it's very sticky in, again, economic terms to change it. But I think these are, although it's temporal, and you can't really form longer term solidarities with these at that moment, everything kind of not equalizes, but like you're on this kind of like the same field on the street. So I think that's why, and these things happen with response to very big things that are very sad. So and like that only happens after like a very big setback to rights. I think that is the main problem, and that's when it happens. They come together and then it dies down, and then it doesn't lead into a solidarity moment. So I think care in that instance, maybe we can learn it sporadically through these temporal. I think that's the only way that I can see, but I don't know if they'll be successful. I don't know, but yeah, unfortunately.
Thank you. Yeah, Attila, we can continue with you.
Thank you for your question and concerns. It's very valuable. Yes, I totally understand your position. This is a repressive work, doing this stuff and creating this methodological and ideological investigation. But at least to my intention, from the perspective of organic intellectuals after Gramsci, it is very important to create this job. Just very briefly, to the Schmittian thing, I think Schmitt is a crucial player here. And it is obvious to me from intellectual perspective, ideological perspective, Orban knows the Schmittian heritage. not just Kashmir, but the whole Gramscian thing. For instance, the current cultural war in Hungary is based on this neo-Gramscian ideological perspective, of course not from the left's perspective, but from the authoritarian right-wing structure. So from the side of the urbanism, they not just realize the political reality, they not just creating this cultural and political war, but they do know the ideological background. I am not sure that Trump himself knows this ideological and intellectual background, but for instance, the Project 25 and the main director of this project, Paul Dan, at Heritage Foundation, and several well-established authors and editors know the ideological structure and background, and at least to my intention, the Project 25 can be seen as a core neo-Schmittian playbook in the current U.S. administration. So this is the fact. There is a neo-Schmittian moment after 100 years, and this can be seen as a very dangerous phenomenon, because the Schmittianism is not just some kind of ideological reinvention of the Schmittian political and constitutional trope too, but I am pretty sure that there is some kind of rehabilitation of the Schmittian anti-liberal and anti-democratic heritage. And just one word in terms of your positive intention. Of course, you're totally right. This is a normal thing. International transmission of ideologies and political thoughts, total normal. But there are dangerous political thoughts and constitutional ideas, and we have to force with this situation. For instance, in terms of this neo-Schmittian approach, we should debate and reconsider the whole interwar period. For instance, just a quick example, at this very moment when the European Union is using the Article 7 against Poland and Hungary, is a small element of militant democracy. For instance, we as a organic intellectual should make a debate about the Lowenstein heritage of militant democracy, because on the other hand, the reconsideration and rehabilitation of Carl Schmitt is happening at this very moment from the authoritarian right-wing perspectives. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Karen, for your remark and comments and question as well. I will start with the transmission mechanism. Actually, in 1972, in France, the Front National, French populist radical right party, has been established. And then in 1974, from 1974, they started to be affected in a very effective way. They affected by French New Right, and the French New Right, what it brought to the political scene at the beginning, the most important thing was the anti-migration policies. And this has been adopted by different countries in Europe. For example, one of the most important political leader who adopted this strategy was Jörg Haider in Austria. Although the Austrian radical right party, Freedom Party, was established before France, they were not able to develop an anti-immigrant policy or or kind of racist ideas in another way, because they were really traumatized by the Nazi defeat or maybe by what happened during the Second World War too. So for them, for French intellectual, it was easier to develop, to repackage, to give a new face to the ancient racist or nationalist idea in the political scene, because it was a shame actually to defend after the Nazi defeat, to defend the racist or nationalist ideas. So it was very effective really for Alain de Benoit and Dominique Fayet, this kind of intellectual, to present the old idea with new strategy. And here what was more important, it was also Gramscian cultural hegemonic theory that they brought to the political, they adopted to the political strategy, and it has been taken by all other countries. And first it affected Italy, and then United Kingdom, and Austria, and Belgium, and then Scandinavian country and Switzerland. But to Poland and Hungary, it was a bit late. It arrived because of maybe their political landscape, in the Balkan or in the East Europe. So yes, it has been used by other European countries, this cultural hegemony of the theory of cultural hegemony and the meta-politics strategy. It has been used, and it was very successful results in many different countries. But some cases are quite different, like United Kingdom and Austria. That's why we didn't put in this paper. And still today, I think what is more important, for example, it changed the way we present the nationalist or racist politics, although today still Alain de Benoit and other Nouvelle Droite leaders, they do not accept many things that we claim. They will reproach them about the nationalistic and racist roots of their strategy and idea. But it is obvious, and almost all Nouvelle Droite and radical right parties specialists agree that there is many racist elements in the new rights ideas and strategy, and it has been adopted by Italian and Polish and Hungarian and other radical right political parties. So yes, sometimes, especially, I don't know, in Hungary and Poland, it's not the case, but especially in Italy and in the United Kingdom, there are still many scholars and political leaders quote quite often Alain de Benoit and his ideas, and especially the idea that it's transformed from Marxism to the strategic meta-politics, which comes from Gramsci. So I think it's important that we see this effect, and the main aim of our research is also to find out this effect and change, etc.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we are run out of time. Ashley, would you like to add something?
I'm assuming we should let people go to lunch. Yeah, good. I think we
Yeah.
kept you a little over time anyway.
Thank you so much for those great presentations, and Karen, for your comprehensive and fascinating comments and feedback. And I was thinking that during your presentations that we should organize a panel on the concept of the elite, conference on the concept of the elite. You know, it's also a concept at the very heart of populism studies, but it's vague, it's multifaceted, and we are talking about whose elites, and when our elites are in power, then how populist leaders sell the idea of elite versus the people. So maybe we can just think about this concept for our future projects at ECPS. So thank you so much for listening, and enjoy your lunch.